There's a strange moment in almost every person's financial journey where something unexpected happens. The early climb feels like walking through heavy sand, every step draining, slow, frustrating, and almost impossible to measure. Yet somewhere around the first 100,000, the struggle changes shape. The climb becomes smoother, the pace becomes quicker, and the progress feels like it starts taking care of itself. It sounds like a myth until you notice that the same pattern appears across generations, across countries, and across different kinds of earners. The first 100,000 behaves like a stubborn wall, and the next behaves like a moving walkway that finally begins to push you forward. The mystery is not why this happens, but why it feels so universal. It almost feels scripted, as if hidden forces inside the system decide to reward you only after testing you with a slow and difficult beginning. People often assume it is simply about income, effort, or discipline, but the truth reaches much deeper. Something happens beneath the surface, a quiet mechanism that starts working only after a certain threshold is crossed. Before that point, the mechanism is practically asleep. After that point, it becomes alive. The most curious part is that this shift has been observed not only by modern economists, but also by financial thinkers from more than a century ago, long before the digital economy existed. The earliest observations came from individuals who tried to understand why some fortunes grew faster than others, despite similar starting points. They noticed that money did not grow in a straight line. It grew like a snowball rolling in slow circles before finally finding its slope. It was not the size of the snowball that mattered, but the moment it finally gained enough weight to roll with its own momentum. Many people misunderstand this comparison, imagining a dramatic moment of luck or a sudden discovery. In reality, it is the opposite. The beginning is made of tiny movements, pennies stacked on pennies, progress so small that it seems invisible. The system almost feels designed to discourage you during those early years. At the core of the mystery sits a simple but powerful idea. Growth attracts more growth. But this idea does not reveal its true nature immediately. The early stage feels quiet and unrewarding because the numbers are too small to amplify themselves. Think of it as a whisper that is trying to become an echo. The whisper exists from day one, but the echo only appears after enough walls reflect the sound back. In financial terms, those walls are built with patience, consistency, and habit. Until they appear, the whisper remains lonely and weak. Historical records show that even some of the most disciplined savers felt stuck for long periods. Letters from early 20th century workers described how saving small amounts felt hopeless because their progress was swallowed by living costs and slow wages. Their accounts are remarkably similar to the complaints people share today. It reveals something important. The difficulty of the first 100,000 is not a personal weakness. It is a structural experience built into the mathematics of growth. It is meant to feel slow. The first breakthrough always feels small. Maybe it is the moment someone saves their first 1,000 at once. Maybe it is the moment they pay off a lingering expense that was draining them for years. Maybe it is the moment they receive their first return on an investment, even if it is only a few dollars. That moment matters more psychologically than financially because it proves that progress is real. Yet even with that small spark, the long stretch ahead still feels like an endless marathon. The reason the early stage feels like a battle is because every gain depends entirely on personal effort. Nothing else is working with you. You are pushing the full weight on your own, without any assistance from growth. You are the engine, the fuel, and the momentum. There is no external support. This is why most people give up during the first phase. They judge the future based on the slow pace of the present, unaware that the nature of their progress is preparing to shift. That shift begins long before the number reaches 100,000. The turning point actually begins quietly. It begins when habits stabilize, when unnecessary expenses shrink, when financial decisions become more thoughtful, and when the small savings finally begin to stack consistently instead of randomly. It begins when the person stops starting over. By the time the threshold is reached, the behavior, mindset, and discipline have already formed the foundation. The number itself is only a symbol. The transformation happened earlier. There is a curious pattern hidden in the stories of people who reached that first important figure. They describe a similar feeling. It is the moment they realize they are no longer fighting each month to simply stay where they are. Something subtle clicks. Their decisions begin to add up instead of cancel out. For the first time, the future becomes a partner instead of an opponent. The first 100,000 is not just a target. It is the point where the weight of the journey shifts from your shoulders to your momentum. The strangest part is that the transition does not feel dramatic. It feels almost accidental. But it is not accidental at all. A mechanism is awakening, and once it does, the journey begins to look completely different. The most silent turning point comes from a shift that does not announce itself. It is not a sudden increase in income or a dramatic financial discovery. It is a quiet moment when the balance you have built becomes large enough to influence the outcome instead of simply recording it. This is where the journey begins to change shape. Before this moment, you are the only source of movement. After this moment, the numbers begin to participate in their own growth. You do the same work, but the results become noticeably different and then increasingly different, almost as if an invisible hand has stepped in to help you. What often surprises people is how late this shift arrives. Many hope it will be noticeable at 10,000 or 20,000, but at those levels, the numbers still depend entirely on your input. They cannot amplify themselves yet. They can only accumulate. The amplification begins later, when the foundation is no longer fragile. The early years feel long because they involve building a base that must be strong enough to support the faster climb that comes afterward. Without that strong base, the later growth collapses or slows again. History offers a fascinating trail of individuals who reached their first meaningful milestone and then experienced a sharp acceleration afterward, not because their luck suddenly improved, but because the mathematics began to work for them. Growth follows a rhythm that is slow, then steady, then rapid, and this rhythm has been observed in countless records from financial archives. The slow beginning is not a flaw, it is part of the design. If the early phase were fast, people would never build the habits that protect them during the rapid phase. There is a clear cause behind why the second phase feels automatic. The base becomes large enough that even small percentages create visible movement. In the beginning, a small percentage of a small number is almost invisible. Later, the same percentage of a larger number becomes noticeable. This is why the same habits feel unrewarding at first and rewarding later. Nothing changed in the behavior. Only the scale changed. Many people misunderstand the idea of acceleration after the first 100,000. They imagine it as a privilege available only to those with high incomes or special opportunities. Yet the pattern appears among people with modest earnings as well. It appears among workers from earlier centuries who recorded their savings in small notebooks. It appears among modern individuals who started with tiny balances in their accounts. The principle does not care where you come from. It only responds to consistency and time. There's a psychological effect happening in the background, too. In the early phase, you constantly feel at risk of losing progress. A single unexpected expense can erase months of effort. A delay in income can interrupt your flow. This fragile feeling disappears once the foundation becomes strong enough. Suddenly, setbacks feel smaller. Unexpected expenses feel manageable. The pressure reduces, and the journey becomes calmer. This calmness creates better decisions, and better decisions create faster growth. It becomes a cycle that finally works in your favor. But before this cycle begins, people experience a long stretch of doubt. They question whether their efforts are making any difference. They look at others who seem to be moving faster and wonder if they are missing something. They search for shortcuts or hope for lucky breaks. Yet the truth remains unchanged. The early stage tests patience, not intelligence. It tests consistency, not creativity. It tests whether you can continue without being rewarded immediately. Once the turning point arrives, the experience becomes different. The same habits that once produced small results begin to produce larger ones. The same monthly savings begin to create a visible acceleration. You start noticing that the time it takes to reach each new milestone becomes shorter. If the first 10,000 took months, the next 10,000 may take less than half that time. This shrinking timeline is not your imagination. It is the effect of finally having enough mass for momentum. There is a story often repeated among financial researchers about a man who spent most of his life working ordinary jobs with no unusual advantages. For decades, he saved modest amounts. His progress was slow and unremarkable. Yet, somewhere around the middle of his life, his savings reached the point where they began to grow faster on their own. Within a few years, his progress overtook that of people who earned more than him, not because he worked harder, but because he had reached the stage where the system finally rewarded him. His journey supports a pattern that appears repeatedly across history. The beginning tests your endurance, but the later stage rewards the endurance that survived. When people reach the part where the growth becomes easier, they often express disbelief. They cannot understand how the difficult journey suddenly became smoother. They feel as if they stepped onto a moving walkway after years of walking against resistance. The walkway was always there, but it only activates when the foundation is ready. The secret lies in how long it takes to prepare that foundation, and how suddenly it transforms once complete. The true mystery is why so few reach this point, even though the path is not complicated. The reason becomes clear when you study behavior instead of numbers. Most people stop during the slow years. They quit before the shift occurs. They abandon the habits just when they are close to creating the base that would change everything. The difficulty of the first part creates the ease of the next. Yet many never experience the second part because they underestimate the purpose of the struggle they are going through. By the time the automatic feeling appears, the person has already become the kind of individual who can sustain it. The journey shapes them long before the reward becomes visible. The battle that felt so heavy becomes the force that protects them throughout the faster climb. This is why the next 100,000 feels different. It is not the number that changes. It is the momentum that finally awakens. There comes a moment in this journey when the weight of the first struggle becomes clear. The early sacrifices begin to reveal their purpose. The long, slow stretch that once felt endless begins to look like a preparation stage that quietly shaped every habit, every decision, and every instinct that a person will rely on during the faster climb ahead. What once felt like a burden begins to feel like a foundation, and the experience becomes strangely peaceful. The pressure that once surrounded every choice begins to fade because the numbers now move with you instead of resisting you. This is the phase where a surprising transformation takes place. People stop thinking about how difficult it is to reach 100,000 and start feeling the pull of momentum. Instead of pushing uphill, they feel themselves being carried forward. The same consistency that once felt exhausting begins to feel effortless, because the results start appearing without the same level of struggle. Progress that previously took months begins to happen in weeks. Milestones that once felt distant start arriving sooner than expected. There is no celebration at this stage, only a quiet realization that the balance has crossed the line where growth becomes natural instead of forced. The fascinating part is how invisible this transition is while it is happening. There is no announcement, no dramatic shift, no signal that the journey is about to accelerate. You only notice it when you look at the numbers and realize they are moving faster than your effort alone could explain. You sense that something has changed, but you cannot point to a single event that caused it. It feels like the turning point has been forming beneath the surface for months, slowly gathering strength until it finally becomes visible. People who reach this stage often describe it as a release from a long period of tension. For years, every small expense felt like a setback. Every unexpected bill felt like a threat. Every pause in income felt dangerous. But once the foundation becomes strong, the fear begins to disappear. You no longer feel that a single mistake will erase your progress. You no longer feel that you're fighting against time. You finally feel stable enough to think clearly, and this clarity becomes another source of acceleration. The most remarkable part is how your relationship with time changes. During the early years, time feels like an enemy because it stretches endlessly while the balance barely moves. Later, time becomes your ally because every month carries you forward even if nothing extraordinary happens. You realize that progress is no longer dependent entirely on effort. It now rides on the strength you built earlier, and this realization creates a quiet confidence. This pattern repeats across generations. It appears in the stories of early merchants who saved their earnings, coin by coin, until their inventory grew enough to expand itself. It appears in the lives of workers who lived carefully for decades until their savings finally began to grow faster than their salaries. It appears in modern records of ordinary people who reached the first meaningful milestone and then saw the next one arrive in a fraction of the time. The world changes, but the pattern remains the same. The beginning is slow, the middle is steady, and the later stage is driven by momentum that seems almost effortless compared to the struggle it took to get there. The deeper truth is that reaching the first 100,000 is not just a financial challenge. It is a psychological transformation. During the early period, you learn discipline, patience, and decision-making. You learn how to avoid impulses, how to control unnecessary spending, how to ignore distractions, and how to stay consistent even when the results are invisible. By the time you reach the first milestone, you have already developed the habits that protect and grow the next milestone. Without these habits, the later acceleration would be impossible. This is why the journey feels so different after the first threshold. It is no longer just numbers multiplying. It is the strength of your discipline multiplying with them. The ease of the second stage is built on the difficulty of the first. That difficulty teaches you how to navigate temptation. It teaches you how to remain stable during uncertainty. It teaches you how to protect your future self. The struggle you face early on becomes the shield that keeps the faster growth safe later on. This is why the process feels automatic once the momentum begins. The hard work is not disappearing. It has simply shifted into the habits you already built. What once required conscious effort now happens naturally. As the balance continues to grow, you begin to notice another subtle shift. Decisions that once consumed energy become simple. Choices that once felt heavy become easy. You understand the value of time more clearly. You feel comfortable staying patient. You no longer chase shortcuts because you have already experienced the power of consistency. This calmness becomes its own form of strength, and this strength becomes the quiet engine that drives your next stage of growth. By the time you surpass the first 100,000, you realize that the difficulty was not a barrier, it was the training that made the momentum possible. The struggle was not wasted time. It was the long, hidden preparation for the automatic feeling that comes afterward. The early years were teaching you how to reach the later years safely. The story ends with 3 simple truths. The first is that the beginning is meant to feel slow because the foundation must be built before anything can accelerate. The second is that momentum appears only after discipline becomes a habit rather than a struggle. The third is that the faster stage is available to anyone who survives the difficult stage without giving up. The final thought is a gentle warning. Those who quit early never discover how close they were to the turning point. Those who remain consistent eventually experience a shift that feels almost unreal. If this journey has taught anything, it is that the reward comes quietly, but only after the habits have been shaped by time. If you find value in understanding how financial progress truly works, you can support this channel by watching more videos like this one. It helps the message reach others who may still be facing the slow beginning that precedes the smoother path ahead.